So the next time we want to talk about the Ibuka Girls in STEM initiative. This is an initiative that's led by the Action Foundation, and the director and a boss of this foundation somebody who is a director of learning and impact in an organization.
He's saying she's not the boss.
She's saying she's not the boss. I said, no, I'm not the boss. You're the boss.
If you didn't know.
June Omune may not be the bossest of bosses, but she's the boss. At the African. Good morning, the Action Foundation. Good morning, June.
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm doing very well.
So you have bosses.
I have bosses, yes.
And there are people who call you boss.
Well,
Everybody.
colleagues.
Everybody's the
I
boss.
You be boss, I beg.
You're
my
not the
boss.
Just a small boss. Just a small person. Welcome to Kenya's biggest conversation.
Thank you for having
Karibu
me.
sana today. The Action Foundation. What's it all about? What is it?
What is it? Wow, that's an interesting way to ask us who we are. But the Action Foundation is a women-led, community-driven organization. We will be turning 13 in December.
Hiya.
Yes, we've been around the block. And we work with children, women and girls with disabilities from marginalized communities. And what we're really looking after is how do we create inclusive and resilient communities where children, women and girls with disabilities can thrive. So what that looks like for us is we do work in three main areas. Health, which is the first program we started those many years ago. And health was around providing access to health services for children with disabilities, particularly below the age of 5, because they experience very unique vulnerabilities in terms of accessing healthcare, therapy services. So we provide that in our communities. We also work in inclusive education, and we target early years learning for children with disabilities. So how does it look like when you have an inclusive class? How does it look like when your school is child-friendly? So that all our kids can go to school without fearing discrimination, without the fear that a teacher is not able to support them because they have a certain type of disability. Then the final program, which is I think the reason we're here today, is our Women and Girl Empowerment Program. And this focuses on adolescent girls with disabilities and women around gender-based violence prevention and response, career advice, life skills and mentorship, because we believe at that pre-adolescent age all through to adulthood, girls with disabilities experience some very unique challenges, and they need people to hold their hands to sort of guide them through life and tell them you can and you will. So that's what the Action Foundation does.
Yeah. June, I think sometimes when we are looking at some of these, when we're saying, look, empowering and leading these girls, it's coming from a challenge. And for us to understand then what the empowerment looks like at the end of the day, it's very important to then understand what the challenge is. Now, young women who are in a quote unquote normal situation have challenges from here till heaven.
Yes.
Now, throw in a disability and it compounds the problem 1,000-fold, isn't it?
True.
So what are some of the challenges that we are looking at that girls at this same age set with disabilities are going through, so that we can then understand what the picture looks like when they have now been led and empowered?
Wow. Well, so when you're growing up and you're a preteen, I think we all struggle with the same things. Body positivity, your self-confidence. Am I pretty? Am I bright? Will I achieve my dreams? What support systems do you have around you? All these kinds of issues. What career choices will I have? I don't know how many girls have been told, don't be a doctor, just be a nurse. Not that there's anything wrong with being a nurse. Or, choose a softer career. I know I was told to pick a soft career so that I'll attract suitors. Those kinds of things. But when you have a disability, now the issue becomes, one, you're a girl in a world that already discriminates women. You're a girl with a disability, so somebody's already looking at you like, wow, you're a girl, you have a disability, you're a liability. How do I start taking care of you? How do I start paying school fees for a girl with, autism? How do I start paying school fees for a girl with a physical impairment? What is the benefit in it for me? Yeah. Then you also have the issue of where you come from as a woman with a disability. If you come from an informal settlement, for example, or if you come from a marginalized community, it gets, it compounds the problems because the vulnerabilities are so much, from exploitation to lack of belief. And I think for us, the main thing we've seen is we have very, very low expectations of our girls with disabilities, particularly in the communities we work in. So they're not seen as people who can positively contribute or who can even contribute in a big way.
Right.
Yeah.
And can they?
Of course they can. Yes, they can.
So how?
How? I think the issue really is, one, we start disabusing this attitude around girls with disabilities and just what they're able to offer. And two, we need to start then having the conversations around how do you confidence build for this girl? Because she grows up, I can give a story from our mentorship program. This girl is a stutterer. Yeah. And it became such a sore point in her life that she chose to take a vow of silence. So she never used to talk. So when we were doing enrollment for girls to get mentorship, she enrolled as a girl who could not speak. Simply because she was tired of being laughed at. She was tired of getting insults, even from her parents. If you can't speak.
Sema ile kitu tunasema.
Exactly. So she said, well, if no one is going to listen to me, I won't talk. And about 6 months into the program, one day she walks into the office and she goes, "Hi, Teacher June," and I was very surprised. I sat back and asked, wait,
You can talk.
you can talk? And she laughed and she said, "Yes, June, I can talk. I just decided I won't be talking because they always laugh at me.
Wow.
And no one wants to listen to me." So we have to start creating that supportive system around our young girls with disabilities that tells them, you can do it. Believe in yourself. This is how you can start appreciating who you are, accepting your disability, because that's also the other issue.
Who
Let's-
is
let's-
going to
hold
do?
on.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, let me just jump in here. Let's define disability based off of the example that you've just given. Because for very many people, I bet you, if you talk about disability, they think about limbs,
Yes.
sight, hearing, and it ends there.
Well, disability is very, how do I say? It's not a one-size-fits-all kind of terminology, but it's really about something that makes you not to be able to do stuff that, for quote-unquote, normal people will be able to do. So there's such a wide range of disability. Some we can see, some we cannot see. Yeah. So that if I have, for example, an intellectual challenge, you may not be able to know that I have it. Yeah. If I have something like albinism, it's very obvious. You can see, and we have very derogatory languages for it. You call them mzungu. You call them, they don't like it, but that's how we'll call them. Yeah. So disability is just something, I think it's more usually like a social construct. I will usually say disability is how society chooses to understand someone who has an impairment. I may not have a limb. One eye could not be working. I may be partially or totally deaf, but disability is how society now then chooses to understand me. Yeah, and there's usually a variety of ways you want to understand it. We need to fix them. There's a medical problem. Let's go to all the specialists so that my child can see. You can also choose to see them as the charities, and this is what I saw growing up. You'd always see the person with a physical impairment in town with a cup, looking for 10 bob. Yeah, or you'd see all of them put in one place, charity home somewhere, and somebody is giving food today, giving clothes tomorrow, giving arms tomorrow. Yeah. But you could also see them as part of society. They are who they are. There's nothing we can do about it. So how do we start creating the society that says we can all succeed in this environment? Why? Because that's the social approach that says we could be different, but we both have the right to enjoy the benefits of our society together. So that's how we usually construct disability, so that we're able to understand and move the needle in terms of all these things that we want to do.
You talk about creating a space where they need to be encouraged and made to feel as though, and not just feel, but to actually know that there's a space for them to excel and do well. Who needs to be the bringer of this message in a society that is still heavily laced with tradition? It's laced with culture. It's laced with certain narrative. The person who you would think would be in the position of encouragement is the same person you say is insulting this girl who is a stutterer. So who is responsible? it seems as though the person who should be bringing these messages of hope and encouragement also needs to learn and change their behavior as well.
Yeah.
So how do we create that?
So that's what we do at the Action Foundation, really. We look at how do we have a very holistic view of the issues that affect children, women, and girls with disabilities. If we focus on girls, for example, the simple solution would be we put them in a room and give them all the empowerment they need, so that even if you're talking about our Ibuka and STEM program, for instance, yes, we'll bring them to this place and we teach them all they need to know about tech or all they need to know about sciences. Go do you, be brilliant, be all these things. And then you take them back to a system that tells them, wait a minute.
You're different.
You're different. You take them to a campus that tells them, we are not able to admit you for this computer programming course because we don't know how to teach a visually impaired person. Yeah? Or you take them back to a house that tells them, but why are you obsessing over computer programming? Where will you even go with it? How can you do it? You know? So that it's not just about focusing on the girl, which is very important, we agree, but it's also about how do we, the people who now understand the issues around disability and inclusion, support the parents, one, to accept the disabilities of their children, because that is where the problem begins. If you do not accept something, then you're not able to deal with it. Then how do you give them the know-how, the information they require to be able to support their children? Yeah. So we usually call it responsive caregiving. How do you really get a parent to be invested in the care of their child from when they're young to when they're that adolescent girl? How do you speak to them? How do you understand their language? Yeah. And how do you even talk to all these other people in the space and tell them, look, this is what you're doing and we need your support, because they'll get out and they'll ask us, I need to get a job as a programmer. But everywhere I'm going, there's no one who's ready to make adaptations so that I'll be able to work. So it's that sort of like looking at everything that surrounds the girl to support them to be the best version of themselves, even when you're working on the girl from the inside.
If you look at the education, because that's what we'll be discussing, the STEM initiative.
Yes.
Look at the education and the facilities that we have in the country. Are they adequate to address the needs of persons with disability, especially, like you said, the young women?
Well, credit where it's due. We have done some work as a country. We are in partnership with the Ministry of Education. There is a directorate called the Directorate of Special Needs Education that really focuses on learners and trainees with disabilities and their experience throughout the education system. So there have been some changes. There have been some reforms that are being done to ensure that there's deeper access to learning opportunities for persons with disabilities, and there is more experiential learning. So when we started this project, we did a baseline study in about 35 schools in Kenya, special needs secondary schools, because that's the target for the Ebuka girls in STEM. We're looking at adolescent girls in high schools. And what we found when we did the infrastructure audit was that we're not doing too badly, actually. We got about 56% of schools that actually had tech infrastructure in terms of they had computer labs, they had a few adapted equipment, they had, things that would be able to make learning a bit easier for children with disabilities. But we had another 44% that had absolutely nothing. When it came to issues of teacher training, for instance, we sampled 35 teachers and 68% of them did not have the requisite skills to enable, STEM learning. So they were saying, I would love to teach this thing, but I don't think I have the skills to be able to do it. Yeah. The girls also gave us very interesting insights. We had focus group discussions with them and they told us, look, we have big dreams. We want to go to that campus. We want to go study that chemical engineering, or we want to study that civil engineering. But my biggest barrier, one, is access to assistive technologies. We don't have them. Yeah. I remember I went to a certain school and this person, the head teacher, was telling us, I do not even have talking calculators for my visually impaired learners. The ones I have are barely enough. So I have to make the hard decision of saying, I will only reserve them for the Form 4s because they're about to sit their exams. So you're interacting with this thing for the first time in your final year of studies.
Yeah.
Yet it's something that you should have been using all the way from Form 1, so that by the time the exam is coming, it's not an intimidating thing. There are those teething problems. But we admit that resources have been put in place, but the issue is they may not be enough. And I believe that we need to then have discussions around how do we partner with governments to be able to support them to provide these things. Yeah. So that's what we learned. So we are somewhere, but we are not yet there.
June, much as it's very good always to look at things glass half full.
Yeah.
Focus on how then you can fill the glass completely.
Yes.
Let's also acknowledge the fact that the glass is half full, and yet it ought to be full.
I agree. Yes.
Now, how many schools do we have that take care of children with special needs? And do they cater for all children with special needs? Just like I started earlier by asking, how do we define disability?
Well, according to the government document that we usually refer to, it's called the Sector Policy for Learners and Trainees with Disabilities. It recognizes roughly 11 to 13 disabilities for purposes of learning and education. So usually what we try to do is to align our programming to those 13 disabilities, and they broadly cover the majority that we know. Yeah. So in terms of learning,
including developmental challenges.
yes. So what we have is a situation where access is still a problem for many, many learners. Yeah. Compared to their counterparts, like women, girls with disabilities are twice more likely to be illiterate. Yeah. They're more likely to drop out of school. They're more likely to not even be in school. So there is that challenge, truly. We need to do a lot more work in terms of ensuring that children with disabilities transition to the upper stages of learning. For girls especially, it becomes worse. Usually in primary school, for example, you'd find they're more or less even in terms of enrollment for boys and girls with disabilities. But as you go higher, that percentage keeps reducing.
Keeps dropping.
Why? A girl with a disability it's easy pickings. It's easy to marry them off. Yeah. Because men will come and offer the parent and tell them, look, she's a burden, right?
I'll take her off your hands.
I'll take her off your hands. That happens. It's very easy sometimes for them to get to be teen moms. Once you're a teen mom, no one wants to invest in your education.
Yep.
Despite the fact that we have a return to school policy in Kenya, even for teen mothers. If you have a disability, that's almost a pipe dream. It will not happen. Sometimes you go to school and you don't feel like you have the right support systems, particularly if, say, you're not in a government school or you're from a very, very marginalized community. The probability that you'll end up in a classroom with the rest of the learners with a teacher who has no particular SNE skills will affect your learning outcomes. So there's very many issues that need to be corrected so that we have, like you say, the glass full. So that we have our children with disabilities, and especially girls, really, really enjoying their learning and going into higher levels of learning. Yes.
Because what you're talking about here, it's the Ibuka Girls in STEM initiative. Girls going into science, technology, engineering, and mathematics already without the disability is a big issue.
Yes.
Now we're talking about girls with disability going into STEM.
Yeah.
They will require a lot more in terms of even teacher assistant. Now, do we have sufficient teachers and teacher assistants for children with disability? So then we can say even these ones now who are heading towards STEM are getting adequate assistance. So what have you been doing as Action Foundation?
So what we've been doing as the Action Foundation is we realize that it's very important for especially the success and even the sustainability of our Ebuka Girls in STEM initiative to involve teachers, because we usually call them the first responders. They're the ones with the girls day in, day out. So what we have been doing as part of this program is we are working with the ministry to develop a guide for teachers, which is in the pipelines now. We want to see how do we develop a robust teacher training program that then supports our teachers to help our girls, because we cannot be in 35 schools at the same time. And if our dreams are to come true, we want to be in every special needs school in the country. The number over 100, we cannot be there at the same time. But this seed that we planted needs to grow. So we are looking at having a manual that then guides the teacher on one, inclusive STEM learning, because it's very important. It's not just that you're teaching for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. How do you get the girl interested in physics, in chemistry, in biology, in computers? how do you teach them in a way that is responsive to their needs? So there's also a case to be made about gender responsive teaching. Yeah, I don't know if, let me pick your brains a bit. The primary math book that we use in primary school, the one that always has 2 students, the cover page, and they're going up the steps. So class 1, they're stepping on class 1. Have you ever noticed how it's always a boy's foot that's in front of the girls? Has always bothered my brain since I was a baby. I always look at that page and I was waiting for those 8 years to see when the girls' foot will be ahead of the boys. And it's messaging that you're giving the girls, and we internalize it. Yeah, when you see examples about who wants to be a pilot, or you see John, you see James, you never see Jane, you never see Anne. So there's something we are telling the girls. And if you're not careful, then these things become ingrained thoughts in the minds of our girls. So that even when we are setting exams, John the doctor, Jane the teacher. Not that there's anything wrong with being a teacher, but can we have some common ground? Because that is where
limitations
it begins.
for one.
Yes. So that's what we are trying to look at and say, look, how do we start shifting that narrative? How do we start changing it? How do you as a teacher start recognizing those things, even in the text that you're using, in the material that you're preparing for your classes, so that when you go to a classroom, you're aware that I have girls, I have boys. Can I use gender neutral language, for example? Can we not say him when we mean, or when we say him means her or he, those kinds of things? Because then it makes me invisible and I am here, you know. So those are the kinds of things we want to do with our teachers. And we hope that once we have an army of very competent teachers who can do this, then they'll be able to start making those micro changes at school level. And we did boot camps last year. And the few teachers we worked with without training, we just gave them the support. They're able to do fantastic things with their learners. Yeah, they've started working on projects. They're giving us updates every day. They're saying, look, this is what we've been able to do. I'm stuck. Help me here. So there's that interest from the teachers that are saying, look, this is something we want to do, but we just need help with the skills. And there's that deliberate effort from the side of government also to say, yeah, that STEM is a pathway now for CBC at least. And so how do we start creating room and space for our learners to experience that in a very real kind of way? And that means we have to involve the teachers.
All right. Let's take a break at 9:30. June Omune is the Director of Learning and Impact at the Action Foundation. We are talking about the work that they've been doing in the Ebuka Girls in STEM initiative. This is for young adolescent girls and young adults who are living with disabilities. How do they get to be supported so they can pursue careers in STEM? Let's take a break, take a look at the weather and traffic. The conversation continues.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.
June Omune from the Action Foundation about the Ibuka Girls in STEM initiative. How many girls have you reached so far? And what are you doing? So how are you rolling out the initiative?
So far, we've been able to reach 1,500 girls from 35 special needs schools in 17 counties, which is, we tried as much as possible to be representative of the Republic. So we went to the older model of the 8 regions, and so we picked schools from there. And we also deliberately selected the major types of disability. So we have representations from the schools for the physically impaired, for the visually impaired, for the hearing impaired, and learners with intellectual disabilities. And we believe this is important because then it sets the tone for us to have discussions and conversations around a truly inclusive STEM learning model that will not just impact girls, but even boys with disabilities at a future stage. We are using the girls, yes, but at the end of the day, once we have this model that works, then it can work for any child with a disability, because we believe that all of them have the right to inclusive STEM education. So our approach is, we have our girls trained on tech skills, how to code, how to assemble robots, so coding, robotics, and mobile app development. And then what happens at school level is they run after school STEM clubs, which are supported by the teachers, and they continue to apply the practical lessons that they've been taught. Because we believe it's not just acquiring the skill to run a line of code or to build up that app, but you also need life skills. Right now we are all about, we've changed the curriculum. Our children need the skills for the 21st century. But in a real sense, how do you teach creativity? You can't go with a PowerPoint to class and say, now creativity is, or problem solving is. Yeah. So we're also looking at how does our program, how does the after school program start inculcating those skills and values in the learner. For example, you cannot do robotics alone. You have to work in a team.
Yeah.
So that if you're not a team player, you will have to learn how to collaborate. How does that look like for learners with special needs? Yeah, so for instance, if you go to a school for visually impaired, again, visual impairment is a range. One person could be totally blind, another one could be partially blind. So we've seen from our boot camps that these girls then support each other. The one who can partially see is guiding this one who's totally visually impaired. And they're doing something, and before you realize it, you have a dancing robot and everyone is happy. Yeah. You have the hearing impaired learners. Again, there's a range. So I could be partially deaf, but I have a colleague who's totally, profoundly deaf. But when we work together, we create magic. So those are the things we want to teach our children. And so that's the approach we've been taking. So we went to all the schools between January and March, and we did the pilot training. We also provided digital infrastructure. What do you mean by digital infrastructure? In the schools that we went to, and they did not have anything at all. So, set up internet, provide machines, the laptops, the robotics kits, all these equipment, so that they're able to access things that they need to learn what they need to learn. And like I always say, it's one thing to come from Nairobi and go to this fancy place in Mandera. You teach the children how to code, and then you carry your machine and come back to Nairobi.
What, in terms of continuity, then what happens?
Then what happens? So we thought through that, and we said, look, for us to really create any meaningful change, we have to capacitate the schools. We have to put in the infrastructure that says you can continue by yourself. And we've seen this happen. So all we get now is photos from our teachers telling us, we are fine. This is what we are up to this week. This is what we were able to do last week. This is what the kids are working on now. Why? Because they have access to these things. The teacher can go online and Google things because he has a modem. He can connect to the internet wherever they are. Yeah, they have a laptop. They have a television. A simple television can make a big change. Yeah, because if you're in a school for visually impaired, not for visually impaired learners, but for hearing impaired learners, for instance, if you have a big screen like the one I'm seeing in our studio here, you have lessons that have captions. So those kids are seeing,
and they can read.
It makes a change. Even for the visually impaired learner, if you have a television and you're playing something that has sound, they're interacting with audio. Those are they look simple to some of us, but they're very mind-changing. They're very game-changing for our learners with disabilities. Because that's how we now start having the conversation about inclusion, the assistive technologies they require. So that is the first step. And we're looking at, what else will they require? And the beauty is we respond to their needs. They tell us this is what is not working, this is what is working. And we adapt so that we are very responsive as well to the needs of the girls as we go. Yes.
How are you plugging in or marrying with what this Directorate of Special Needs Education, and that's at government level, is doing now? Because when you talk about assistive technology, it's absolutely important. When you're looking at then now girls with disabilities going into STEM, it's not just the books, it's the experience. So then how are we plugging into what they may be doing, and how is the directorate also getting clear lessons from what you're doing around the country?
For us, our relationship with the directorate has been one of very good, positive working relationships.
Okay.
We've had the partnership that said, look, from the word go, we have to engage with the duty bearer. And it has been quite successful because they are the ones who have given us the technical advice. Yeah, in terms of this is what the policy says. This is what the basic education curriculum framework is telling us about STEM. This is what CBC is saying, so they're the ones who are giving us the technical advice around how do you go about this issue. They're telling us these are the gaps we're experiencing. So that if your project is able to then help us address this gap, we are pushing the needle forward. Yeah, in terms of even identifying the schools, they're able to really advise us in terms of ensuring the diversity. So from the word go, we have engaged with them even from the project inception, so that we are not coming here as claiming to be heroes or saying that, yeah, you people are terrible, you're not doing anything. But it's more, where have you reached?
How can we
move forward together? So they've been very instrumental in providing us with the technical support, technical assistance, and the technical advice to even go into the schools and to tell us, this is how you get in. This is what we want you people to do, because this is what will help us help 2,000 children as opposed to 400 or 200.
Yeah. So who's finished? And when I say who's finished, we talk about the 1,500 girls that have been impacted. Who's gone through the system and finished, and then say, here you have presented an example,
yes,
that this intervention works.
So where we are at now is, this is just the first year. So we are also tracking and learning who are those of our girls who finish, because the target is girls in Form 1, 2, and 3. This is a 3-year-long project that started last year, and so we are just at the beginning of it. And so we are also holding ourselves accountable to see how many of our girls will then move into the pipelines. But what we are seeing now, the preliminary, what you can call them preliminary results, is that there's an increase in the confidence of our girls. Teachers are saying, look, this thing is actually beneficial. I can see my girls a little bit more interested in physics now. It doesn't look very rocket science. I'm seeing them taking quite a big interest in computers. They're more, they ask a lot of questions during math, all those things. So there's that. We've started making that shift about how are these girls conceptualizing the sciences, which for us is great, because then that means they'll be able to take them up in higher classes, and they'll be able to look at themselves and say, okay, let me be a programmer. We've had girls who've made games with Scratch. And this is after 2-3 days of a boot camp over the weekend. And so we're telling ourselves, if we do this thing consistently for 3 years, our expectation is that somebody will now outgrow, the basic Scratch and say, I now need to know Python or Java. Yeah. We'll have somebody else who's now going into making very complicated robots, because that's what we're seeing. In some other places like Mandera, we are seeing girls who are on the verge of dropping out. They're not very adamant. I'm not going anywhere. I'm staying here. Why? There's this interesting thing that is happening in school that I cannot afford to miss. That is happening. And so we are waiting to see at the end of 3 years how many of our girls will go into, post-secondary pipelines for STEM. Whether they'll go to take a course in code or they'll go to do civil engineering, and how that looks like. Yes.
John, let me ask. So obviously you have the statistics which you've looked at, the Form 4 exams over the last couple of years. If you compare boys and girls in performance of these STEM subjects, math and sciences, well, how is it over the years, and what is your target?
I'll speak for boys and girls with disabilities because that's what I focused my data on. The performance is still not so, it's not the A's and the B's that we know. But even at that level, the boys are still outperforming girls. And so when we ask the girls, they say, these concepts are very difficult to understand.
By outperforming, what do you mean? In terms of, so X number of students start KCSE.
Yeah.
X number of students with disabilities start KCSE last year. Boys who scored A, X. Girls who scored A, Y.
Well, I can give you an average because we did a sampling, so I don't have the definitive results from all the special needs schools in Kenya, But our girls, the girls with disabilities, on average, across the 35 schools that we went to, if we were to give an average, that would be the D's. For the boys, C's thereabouts. So our target is also, can we get this D to move to a C or even a C minus? Because for us, that will be progress. It will mean that concepts have been understood. That girls are drawing comparisons from what I did in this Makey class, for example. I can see it in physics. I can use robotics to understand biology, for example. If we use that kit, not just for the after-school club, but if the teacher comes to the class with it, and we make a human form, for example, can you use that kit to explain body functions? So those are the things we're looking at, and we're also tracking actually performance in terms of at the end of the year, what was your grade when you were starting? It was a C. Is it now a C plus? Is it a B? And progressively, we'll then be able to see in the next 3 years that this has been the result of our work. So for now, we just have the, what do I call it? The attitude change. But in terms of what is changing in terms of education and learning outcomes, that we still need time to do, and we are actively tracking that. So maybe I will come back in the next 2 years and tell you now.
Yeah, and you see progress, or
Yes,
even
and
just
we see
starting from
progress.
this year.
Yes.
In the next KCSE, you start seeing.
Because I think we'll have our first batch of candidates from this program next year. So then we'll be able to see the real changes that we've been able to make. Yes.
I mean, obviously, funding is a challenge when it comes to, because there's additional in terms of material that's needed. There's additional in terms of special teaching. Okay, before getting to that funding part of it, so teachers also need to be trained, because we are also looking into this area, and the teachers who are teaching what would be normal girls and boys don't have the training of how to then handle a special needs or a girl living with disability. How then do you handle the training aspect for teachers now, not even just looking at the students?
Yeah. So for that, we're still working with the ministry to see how we'll be able to develop a training program that helps us to build the skills of our teachers. But the advantage we have, at least with the special secondary schools that we are working in, all the teachers there they already have the preliminary special needs training. So what we really need to do is to just give it the inclusion aspect around STEM. Yeah, because traditionally sciences and inclusion are very, so even for us, it's a learning. The teachers are also giving us feedback and saying, okay, I can see myself do this, So we are developing that manual first, because we have to have at least a documented methodology that will make sense even to the policy makers, even to the duty bearers, because the teachers belong to the government. I can't come and purport to be the expert when it comes to, teacher training. So we are working with them to develop a model, a toolkit that will be able to work even within their own curriculum framework. Because once we have that, then it means long term, can we have it validated, for example, so that it's something that can be used as part of the normal curriculum, because then that's change. It's not a document that is sitting in TAF's office, but it's a document that is anchored within what the ministry is already doing in terms of achieving inclusive education.
Who's funding your program?
Who's funding our program? The Action Foundation was fortunate to be selected for the Google Impact Challenge Award for last year, and that's how we were able to scale up this program. Initially, it was a small pilot that was being done at community level. So during holidays, we'd invite girls to our center and we teach them, the basics for like a day, 3 weeks, of course with partners. Then we had some seed funding from the US Embassy that we were able to pilot in 3 schools because we said this was a good model. How can we get it to more girls? Where do we get a lot of children? In schools. And so we did it in 3 counties. And from the results of that pilot, we were able to fundraise. And luckily, we were awarded by Google.org, their Impact Challenge for Women and Girls for last year. So that is the funding we got for this program.
So it's going to last, the funding is going to last the 3 years.
Yes. And then after that, we have to go back to the trenches.
But this is particularly for this particular...
For this particular project. So we're very...
Project, the Ebuka.
Yeah. Yes.
So
Ebuka
there are other
Girls
funders
STEM.
who come in now to support the others. The early childhood education,
Yes.
health programs. You get different funding for those.
You always have to be on your toes. I mean, our community will always have needs, and I don't think there's enough of us in the space to be able to solve all those problems. So fundraising is a constant game. Our resource mobilization is something that we do very frequently. And sometimes we usually like to say that when you think about fundraising or resource mobilization, people always think it's about money. But sometimes even resources, in-kind support can go a really, really long way. Someone may not be able to give the Action Foundation money to continue this project, but if you give me access for my girls to go to offices and get mentorships and job shadows and internships, that's something. Yeah. Or if you decide to donate 50 computers and I know that I have a school in place X that is very resource scarce, I will take 2 computers there. I will take another 3 to another school. That is support. So we're also very keen.
If you were to do a resource mobilization pitch right now, John, on air, right?
On air.
Yeah. What's your greatest need that you have today that you say, in kind or in cash, this is our current great need or a gap that we see that, if filled, would go a long way in supporting this Ebuka program to achieve its desired objectives?
I think off the top of my head, we have 2. The main need that we have is we need to have a pipeline where our girls will go into after they leave high school. So for us now, key in our strategy is how do we start exposing our girls to those STEM opportunities post high school. So we have an open call for mentors. We have an open call for people who want to provide the linkages to industry. Tell me, bring 50 girls to shadow at my office for a month during the holidays. Tell us you want our girls to visit your high-tech office so that they can be able to start visualizing.
This is what I
want to do. Because sometimes if you talk about it in abstract, it's not so real. But when they go and when they come here and they see all this fancy equipment and they're like, wow, I can fidget with this one day in the future. It makes sense. The next thing is about assistive technology, assistive devices to implement this program. That's a huge need. And it requires both in cash and in kind support. Because much as we are talking about the ones that we've been able to do, there's still a lot to be done. Yeah, we still need to. One head teacher challenged and he said, "Look, this is very fantastic, but let's deal with housekeeping first. Give me talking calculators, because then we can have a discussion about the grades in math improving." Yeah. So we even need to settle those housekeeping issues. So for us, resourcing the schools is still an area that we need a lot of support in, so that we're able to really say that our project contributed to schools being strengthened infrastructure-wise, that we now have schools connected to the grid. Come and tell us, we'll connect internet in your schools. A school in Marsabit or in Wajir or in Turkana, give us internet. When you give them that, we are good to go.
We're good to go.
Yes.
Sorry, it's become very cold in here. Yeah,
A bit, yes.
it's 23 degrees. I don't know what's up with this AC. 23 degrees is room temperature. I mean, now it's 23 degrees and I'm freezing. And I can tell you have the kind of thing that I have as well. Sinuses acting up.
Yes.
Ole.
No problem.
We'll sort it. We are finishing in a few minutes. So how does someone get in touch with you then if they'd like to come in and support the Action Foundation, especially on this Ebuka program?
We are very available. We are open. You can send us an email on info@theactionfoundationkenya.org. You can find us on social media, on Twitter at The Action Kenya, on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, The Action Foundation. We can always talk. We did our national launch yesterday, and we're excited. So you'll find our white paper on inclusive STEM learning will be on our website shortly. Our website is www.theactionfoundationkenya.org. We are available there as well, and you can always shut us up and we'll be able to respond.
You know, there's also the other aspect, which is advocacy and raising the awareness.
Yes.
And looking at the support that maybe the directorate needs, even in terms of budgetary allocation. And they talk about the money that goes straight to the Ministry of Education and then straight to education for special needs. There needs a lot of advocacy. This is why you need, policymakers and particularly parliamentarians. What message would you have to those leaders that have been elected by Kenyans to represent them in the Houses of Assembly?
That is a very tough spot question. But I think it's important. It's very important for us to have conversations about just how much it costs to educate a learner with a disability. Because sometimes I don't think we're very realistic in how we assess the cost of learning for a child with a disability. You could give me 50,000 a year, but if that should be able to cater for boarding, for food, for textbooks, for health insurance, for all these things, I end up having no money to get the assistive technology that my kids require, or I will get them at a lower capacity than I should get them. So those are conversations that we really need to start having. School infrastructure is still something that we need to do a bit of advocacy, and to see how can we support our lawmakers, our policymakers, to see the realities. Yeah, if you go to some schools, for example, the issue is not even about learning or being in class, but what happens when you're outside of class. Yeah, there are children who need such special care, and it costs money, and often that is not factored in. So we need truly to do advocacy around the holistic cost of educating a learner with a disability. Then we can start having a lot more, we are staying in school because things are being provided. Yes, much as it's costly, but I think at the end of the day, it's worth it. I don't think there's any nation that wants to have a segment of the population that is unproductive. So the more we get our children with disabilities to be people who will be contributing citizens, the sooner we'll get to our vision 2030 and beyond, I think.
Come again, June, with basic statistics from, basic budgetary allocation for education for children with disabilities, and the impact that has, and the gaps, all right? Let's use this platform for that advocacy, for awareness creation, so everybody understands. When you talk about that your education receives the lion's share of Kenya's budget, 800 billion shillings, how much is actually going to educate those children who are most vulnerable? That's the thing. So let's talk about those. And so we can raise awareness.
So I think part of the issue really that we have, I read somewhere that if you're not counted, then you don't count. Yes. So we need to first understand how many of our learners with disabilities do we really truly have? That has been a serious pain point in the disability space that we need to fix. Because once we know how many of us are here,
then we can
now start telling our
for them.
we can start budgeting for them.
That's true.
You can go to your local MP and tell them, look, in this constituency we have X number of children with disabilities,
and they need help.
They're in high school and they need.
So you see now why you need to come back. Now you know why you're coming back and what you will be talking about.
Yes.
June Omune is the director of learning and impact at the Action Foundation. She's been here. We'll be talking about the Ebuka Girls in STEM initiative. Very, very good program.